never let it be said that I can't do technical drawings. Here is the most basic example of an engine. Pumps air in, makes an explosion, pumps air back out again. So what does a turbo do? Well, you take one of these and you add this to it. Probably the worst bit of continuity, but hey ho, this isn't about the special effects, it's about the technology. As we discussed efficiency, when your exhaust gases come out here, if you put them through a compressor that turns a shaft wheel, those exhaust gases can be recycled and used to produce energy. This little pump that turns the shaft wheel turns another pump, and that draws air in and pumps it into the engine. Air in, pump, 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 air out, more pump, pump, pump. All of this has an exponential improvement on the performance. Great, free power. Well, not exactly. We'll get into this more over the coming episodes, but there are issues with turbos. What we need to focus on here is the ins and outs of what the turbo is and why they go wrong. So, this shaft does not spin at the same speed of the engine. That's the first thing to know. In fact, they can spin at this much RPM, which is actually quite staggering. So, high speed RPM causes problems in itself. That needs to be very well lubricated and very well balanced. Two things that, if they fall out of sync, will cause you problems. Lack of lube means that shaft is going to die. Now, what's this lube and where does it come from? Quite simply put, this engine, for all the time that it's going to be running, will always run pressurised oil. Most turbos will have a takeoff line that goes to the bearing in the middle of it, keeps it constantly lubricated, and then just dumps straight back and into the sump. If the oil sludges up, if that blocks, if it's crap, all of that will fail. Has that happened to the Skibby? Not exactly. What other things can go wrong with it? Remove the filter. So, don't forget, this is going to draw in cold air before it chucks it into the engine. It's going to do it with a very precise impeller blade. If you get even fine particles into that, it's going to kill it. And if it kills the impeller blade, it will then start killing the shaft and start killing everything else. And if that impeller blade goes, it gets sucked into the engine and catastrophe. So, there are many things that make turbos good, but there are many more complications that come with it. What has happened to mine is a slight nick, a tiny wee imbalance in the impeller blade, and what that has caused is a loss of boost, a loss of balance, and a turbo that just doesn't work right. So that is what is going to be replaced. How do we do that? We strip it apart, we change all the wear items. That's a simple way of putting it. Now, turbos are more commonly referred to as hot sides and cold sides. Your hot side is everything that the exhaust gases drive, i.e. exhaust gas in, exhaust gas out, and this compressor wheel. The cold side is everything that this shaft drives and pulls in. For example, cold air from the filter, and then slightly warmer but still fundamentally cold air into the engine. So, we've also got an oil line that goes in, and an oil dump that comes back out. That lubricates the little bearing that lives in here. However, on modern turbos, you've also got another aspect to consider. Coolant, which also goes in and out. So this also gives you another problem. If your car has not run the proper coolant that this turbo is designed to have, you're going to get corrosion issues. So yeah, there's a lot of things here to consider. Luckily, this one that I have seems more or less okay. It really is just this wee bent impeller wheel. That's not to say we're not going to find more problems, but fundamentally, now that we've got it apart, we can inspect all the things and build something a bit better. So here is laid out our exploded TD04. Now you've got your hot side, your cartridge, your cold side, and all the associated gubbins that needs to be put back into it. Now, why did we strip this down? This is the old intake compressor wheel. Now as you can see, if I get right up and close, there is a little bit of fudge, i.e. something has come in the intake and has this wheel up completely. So this is what we need to replace, and that's the replacement. As you can see, lovely, shiny, straight, and I'm going to put it down before I drop it. In order to put this together, we're also going to add a whole load of replaceable service items. And to discuss this, here's the man who hates the camera. So, the first thing we need to do is all of our turbo is assembled using this. This is the cartridge, as some folk call it. I don't know if there's a more...
Well, the bearing housing.
Bearing housing.
And then when you would buy it all together, you could call it a cartridge, or a CHRA, which is constant hub rotating assembly, is what, so CCHRA or cartridge, but cartridge, what people know. So that's our journal bearings. That's our thrust bearing.
Thrust bearing, yeah.
What we're going to do with this one is we're going to replace it with a step gap ring, because this is a fantastic little upgrade, and I do not know why more people don't talk about these when we're doing turbos. Now here's the standard ring which they will give you. So
that's a standard one.
Standard one, and that's a step gap. You see how it steps over?
Aha.
And you get such a fantastic seal, so it's ideal for cars that what we would call in turbo is for overspooling. So if we've got a turbo, we're running more boost, and what we'd class it as is overspooling, these are perfect because they create such a good seal. And even in some, you know, Bog Warren or whatever turbo Garrett, sometimes I don't know why these aren't fitted to all high performance turbos, because they're a fantastic little upgrade for all it is. Yeah,
you will get oil passage.
Yeah, of course you will.
There,
yeah,
no matter what. And these things are subject to thermal expansion, so
yeah,
100%,
you know. Yeah, so that's why it makes these such a fantastic wee thing.
So this shaft runs through the entirety of the turbo. So that right now is the hot side. That will live in the exhaust part of it. That shaft goes all the way through to the new compressor move for the cold side we're going to put on, and everything lives on it. So that is the rotating assembly within the turbo.
That's it, yep.
There you go. That's it in place.
In place.
And if anyone's wondering, this is sweet chili, not honey and mustard.
But Lucas Build Oil, I love this stuff. It's really good.
You can see,
Get a nice kind of viscosity to it. It's really.
you can also see when you're pulling your finger off, there is actually a tack to it, so
Yeah,
it's not going to wash away as soon as you fire up.
Yeah. And this is another thing. This is why oil changes are so important in turbos. I don't know if you can pick that up, but look how small that hole is for lubricating the thrust collar at the top. Can you
So
camera
all
pick
the
that?
oil pressure for that thrust bearing comes through that tiny
Through
little
here.
hole.
Yeah. So the top there, and there it is there, the other side. On that, I'll just use a normal, so, something like a 1030 on that oil, just to lubricate it at the top.
Now, something that you might hear from time to time in the turbo world is a 360 degree bearing. But what is a 360 degree bearing? Because this can be quite confusing and can trip a lot of people up. Quite simply put, this little brass thing that we've been fondling a few times, that is a 360 degree bearing. Now if you look, you would imagine being a 360 degree bearing, it should be fully circular. But it's not. The simplest way to explain this is to imagine the forces that act on this shaft. Now, you will have an up and down force, and that's more or less dealt with by the oil-filled bearing shafts that sit along the line of the intermediate shaft. Now, the problem you're going to have is, when this thing loads up with boost, you get pressure going this way as well. So there is a tendency for the shaft to want to move up and down its length. That movement is basically what thrust is. So you have to mitigate against this by stopping that movement, because if it moves too far, you will lose boost and ultimately lose oil pressure. But you also still need to let the shaft spin. So if you clamp that up completely on both ends and stop the movement, you're also going to stop the spin. So that's where the thrust bearings come into play. So if you look at this bearing, you'll note that the name 360 degree doesn't come from the full bearing, but actually the inside bit here. There is 360 degrees of coverage. See that? If it wasn't that, what you would find is that this thing would have a gap in it. That would be to allow an increase of oil flow around this bearing to keep it lubricated. Essentially treating it as a packer, but because this has 360 degrees of coverage, it will stop more thrust happening. So that's why a 360 degree bearing is something that's desirable in a high performance turbo. Less of this means more boost. However, there's always going to be a consequence. You will have a reduction in oil flow around this that will help cushion and lubricate that movement of thrust. So you've got the kind of trade-off. The good part about smaller turbos is they do alright with 360 degree bearings. The big problem comes with a bigger turbo because it needs more oil. But that's not our problem, because we're putting a 360 degree bearing in. And again, yes, it's oversimplified. I'm just trying to explain. All you turbo experts, do one.
The rings or the seals. Now, when people say turbo seals, which is perfectly fine when doing it, it's actually rings, but that's what it is. It's just the actual ring is what creates the seal, and that's what a turbo seal is.
So anytime you see a smoky turbo, this is the part that's failed.
That's it, yeah, it's the seal. So, and you'll normally find it'll be on 9 times out of 10 it's the exhaust side. It's always the hot side that fails. Very rarely do I see the cold side fail, unless it's some sort of you know, something's come through. If something comes through the wheel to this extent, and you maybe think, oh, it's just damaged the compressor wheel, again, 9 times out of 10 it will damage the shaft. Normally it will bend the shaft. In this case, we're actually very fortunate it's not, but what we can do is we can always skim the shaft. You tend to find you'll get bearing marks here. We'll tend to skim it and it's not a problem. That's the thrust collar there. Okay. The thrust collar washer's underneath, and then that is actually what's going to give us the seal going onto the compressor wheel.
Anything that lives in here from this point is oil filled.
Yeah.
And that is engine oil, so that will run at normally 20 to 60 psi of pressure as per the engine will. So this is a pretty integral little part. So keeping the oil inside the turbo is imperative. Now, most things keep the oil in, you do it with a rubber seal. The problem is the temperature that a turbo runs means that rubber is completely not an option. So this has to be done with mechanical seals, i.e. metal on metal. That is why the tolerances in a turbo are so tight. That metal on metal normally would mean scoring heat and death, but with the fine machining that goes into the turbo components, they don't touch. There's just a light skim of oil that lubricates it without getting by it. Pretty trick.
Compressor wheel, this is a single stage balance.
Right, what does that mean?
Single stage balance means that this has been balanced. Now you get single stage, 2 stage and 3 stage. Now, normally what we do is we put that on single stage and that's okay. And then once it's on its process, you can then second stage balance it when it's attached to the core. If your fancy pants, for our purposes, single stage is fine because it's your car.
Thanks very much. So that's the bit we did at the start when we drilled the wee hole. And we drilled the wee hole here. That's just to make sure that's orientated. What to look for before they bring one into you, or?
Always is what we call player end float. So the simplest way to check them is if you can front and rear, and we're checking for any side to side, just checking for any kind of play. What we don't want is end float, which is in and out movement, which means it's completely knackered. So that's normally the easy way to tell, but easily sometimes if you're just checking it yourself, you've got the intake off and you can feel a bit of play from here, you're guaranteed if you can get to the other side, it's going to double or triple that play because you're only moving it to the front. Once you get into the back, you really will feel smiggle. So any sort, we can allow for a small amount of play. In small turbos, you really don't want any play. On the larger turbos, we can allow for a wee bit of play. And bear in mind, there's no oil running through the turbo when it's stopped for you to check.
Voila, one freshly overhauled, good to go TD04. Now, you're probably going to be wondering, why overhaul when you can buy new? So, you can buy one of those, i.e. a TD04, but not an OEM spec one on eBay or other auction sites for not a lot of money. The problem is you don't know how well they're built. They are not an original remanufactured turbo, so your metallurgy could be absolute chocolate, guaranteed your bearings will not be good, and the overhaul price of a good turbo is more or less the same money as buying a new but lesser quality. Why buy twice when you can just buy right? Overhauling the turbo for me was the only option. Now granted, I didn't go balls out and build some crazy hybrid, because remember, I don't want to kill my Subaru. I actually would like a nice safe 300 brake, and that turbo is now perfect for it. So hopefully that will get rid of the whistle. In the next episode, We'll get that fitted to the car and probably a few other things as well. So we're definitely not done with the Impreza yet. Lastly, you may be wondering, continuity, wasn't that kind of already failing before the car went for paint? Yes, I actually bought a core and we did this while the car was getting paint so that we still have a bit of content going, but more importantly, because I knew there's no point having the car off the road twice to get painting in a turbo when I can have a turbo here and just spend the weekend swapping it over once it's painted. So that's why it's all about arsehole protect. Anyway, Patreon's running up beside the screen. Massive thanks for your support. I'll clarify this, yes, it's still the low cost that pays for and nothing else, but honestly guys, we couldn't be building that low cost without you. It is literally keeping that project moving. If you want to know what that's about, patreon.com/toolsandtrack. If you want a turbo overhauled, this place is Turbotech in Ibrox in Glasgow. Craig is very reasonable and very good at what he does, so have a wee Google, Turbotech in Ibrox in Glasgow, details here. Last of all, please guys, like, subscribe, all that jazz. If you found this useful, and I'm pretty sure somebody must have, hit that button and keep us tuned for more content coming soon. And until that day comes, drive safe guys.